This episode of the WAN Manager podcast is brought to you by the WAN Summit. The WAN Summit brings together buyers and providers of enterprise WAN services to identify and discuss trends in international network planning, procurement, and design. The WAN Summits cover all of the challenges, trends, and toolkits a WAN manager needs to do their job. And they're built around learning and networking. You can expect enterprise-only sessions, focused discussion groups, and no-pressure consultations between network managers and solution providers. And you're in luck. There are 2 WAN Summits on the horizon. You can join us in Dusseldorf on May 10th or in New York City on June 21st. Head to wansummit.com for more information.
Welcome to the WAN Manager podcast. I'm your host, Bryan, as always, and this is the show where we talk to networking experts about the data services that make business possible. So as we're recording this, we're just almost exactly 2 years on from when the whole world shut down. Most WAN managers at that time were scrambling to accommodate massive changes like remote work, different traffic patterns, gateways at data centers and whatnot. Our guest this episode, however, is in the healthcare industry as a network manager, where in addition to all of those changes, the business needs themselves actually really changed. And so had to do all of those other accommodations, but also shift to accommodate those other disruptions. So for that, I'm really excited to have on the show this case study from Carl Flaherty, who's at Mainline Health in Pennsylvania and is the manager of network services there. Welcome, Carl.
Yeah, good afternoon, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's we've been trying to work this out for several months now, so I'm glad we finally got it together. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, we squeezed it in between variants, I guess you could say.
That's exactly, right? So it's pretty much, and that cues us up well for what we're going to talk about, right? So,
right.
So before we jump into the case study, Carl, can you just give us a brief background on yourself, how you ended up at your current role?
Sure. So I've been in the IT field for 30 plus years. I did start my career in the for-profit healthcare industry and was with a company for 20 plus years in that space, and then kind of branched out and got into the private sector a little bit in financial services. And my career kind of came full circle, and I had an opportunity to get back to healthcare IT, which is something that I had grown an affinity for in the beginning part of my career. And really wanted to get back to it when I joined Mainline Health. And as of 2 weeks ago, it was actually 3 years.
Okay,
I
gotcha.
was fortunate enough to join before the pandemic.
I was going to say, you're still pretty new when this all went down, too. So that's something, yeah.
Relatively speaking. So, it's been quite the couple of years, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and like I mentioned in the beginning, you're in Philadelphia area. I should say, it took me an embarrassingly long time. My wife is from Southeast Pennsylvania and lived in Philly for a while, and it took me the longest time to connect like the main line, as in the sort of Tony suburbs of Philadelphia. With that's what the name of your company is, right? Yeah. So tell us about Mainline Health. Yeah.
Yeah. So primarily, Mainline Health is a regional healthcare provider. We're a nonprofit organization. Serving Philadelphia and the surrounding suburban areas. We're pretty much comprised of our main, what will be known by our main tier 1 hospitals, those being Lankenau, Riddle, Paoli, Bryn Mawr, and Bryn Mawr Rehab. Those are kind of the cornerstones of the industry. And then we also have our tier 2 locations, which are comprised of urgent care centers, as well as our support organizations, our IT office, our HR, and accounting offices, our administrative offices. And then we have, somewhere in the neighborhood of, 70 to 80 practices that are affiliated with Mainline Health that we have connectivity with as well, that kind of makes up the entire Mainline Health family.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's I'm certainly no expert in this area, but it seems like a pretty similar setup as you would find in a lot of kind of regional hospital centers throughout the U.S. in different cities, basically.
It is, yeah.
Hmm.
It's just that we have the leverage for certain things that we're doing to be regional, so that our reach doesn't have to be as broad as some other companies which
Right.
have national scale to deal with. So we're able to maybe move a little bit more quickly and
Mm.
touch and feel a little bit more directly because at any given moment in time we can be at one of our facilities.
Right, right, right. Which is sort of key to how this case study plays out in some ways, right?
It
So
is.
yeah. So on that note, you mentioned you had been there only about a year before the COVID shutdowns struck. What was? It's always useful when we do one of these case studies to get the kind of the picture of what did the network look like when you joined. What kind of services were you using? What was the general setup before we get into what happened after?
Sure. Yeah, well, interesting to note. I joined Mainline Health at the outset of a major multi-year network infrastructure refresh project,
Mm,
uh,
hmm.
which primarily I think begot the fact that they were looking to bring someone in that had some of my skill set in order
Gotcha.
to lead what was going to be going on. We had an aging infrastructure architecture, probably not something that's all that uncommon to hear, particularly in the nonprofit segment.
Hmm.
It's kind of that ride it until it dies mentality,
Hmm.
and we were at the point of dying. Not
Yeah.
not to use the
So
term
you
in
were
the
brought in to bring new life, do CPR, right?
well, at least to
Yeah.
oversee the surgery, if you will.
Right.
So,
Right.
and we were moving from an Avaya switch route environment and now implementing an entirely Cisco switch route network infrastructure.
Hmm.
We do have two hosted data center locations. We're at SunGuard and also at TierPoint, also regional hosting providers. That environment was a bit more progressed in terms of the equipment that was running there. We were really talking about refreshing our core and access layer at our facilities,
Hmm.
and we're we're well into it now. 2.5 years into it, the project will be elongated, probably about somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 months, and that was due to just
Hmm.
slowdowns during the pandemic. And
Right.
the slowdowns were caused by a number of reasons, right? We had to pivot resources in order to address needs of the organization. And we also started to, on the back end, hit some of the supply chain issues that
Hmm.
were impacting all of the suppliers. Luckily, we had a large amount of gear that had already been procured and was
Right.
being prepped by our networking partner for deployment. So we still had a little bit of a leg up to where we continued the project, albeit at a little bit more of a staggered pace.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's hitting everywhere. I've been covering telecom services pricing for 15 plus years, and we've only ever seen prices go down, but they're actually maybe even increasing in some cases these days for various services because of these things that the supply chains have been cut down and equipment upgrades are so much harder to do, and that's what's long term been driving all of that is that you can always put more bits through the same infrastructure and whatnot, and that is it is having its impact all the way down to by the wholesale submarine cable kind of market even. So yeah.
Yeah, not a day goes by where I don't think I'm getting an email or a reminder that something that we might be considering. If you have anything out to any of your vendor partners for quoting, I'm being reminded constantly that so and so's prices are going to be increasing at the end
Hmm.
of this month, the end of next month.
Right.
We're on a fiscal year that runs from July to July, so a little bit different for me to get used to as well. I was used to
Hmm.
operating under a just a standard calendar fiscal
Calendar.
year,
Yeah.
so that's been a little bit of a challenge. But yeah, I'm sure that we're going to be feeling the ripple effects. But we've been proceeding, and also being regional, as I had mentioned. We were leveraging
Hmm.
when I joined the organization. We were leveraging a regional dark fiber environment that was provided by a regional provider by the name of Crown Castle.
Hmm.
And in looking at those services, we decided that we were going to transition from dark to lit services and something that fell a little bit under more of their managed services model.
Hmm.
So that's something that we've done as well. And we were able to bring a little bit more of stability, diversity, and redundancy to the entire environment in doing so.
Just a curious question for me on that would be with that transition between dark and lit services. What's the thinking there? Do you reduce some kind of overhead even on the infrastructure team by not having to kind of manage those links yourselves? Like,
I wish I could say, I
yeah,
wish I could say that we did, but that was
hmm
not the case. I
hmm
did not have. It wasn't as if I was overstaffed or had a team of ONS engineers at my
hmm
disposal who were overseeing the dark fiber environment. But really, it was to get. Um, we needed the assistance of having some vendor touch and feel to
hmm
respond to changes within our environment.
hmm
And that was really one of the motivating factors for
right.
moving to those services
hmm
with Crown.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so I want to kind of dive into the way that I set this up, the situation, coming up here almost exactly 2 years ago, more or less, when in response to what was going on in the world, Mainline Health decides to set up pop up COVID sites. I still see pop up COVID sites around these days. So what did the sort of the administrators of the hospital system come to you as the IT infrastructure team and ask for, and how did you end up sort of addressing that problem?
Yeah, it's I'd love to tell you that this was a lot of high end deliberative conversations that
Yeah,
went
it's,
on, but
it's
uh,
scramble and what are we doing? Heads on fire, right? Yeah,
It,
yeah,
but
uh,
quite literally, it was some of the first conversations were between myself, the director of technology, who I report up through, and the system director of technology, along with our chief medical information officer, sitting in a
hmm
conference room, socially distanced and masked
of
at
course,
that
yeah.
particular time, talking. And basically, the conversation kind of went something like, I really don't know everything we're going to need to do, but we're going to need to do something. So,
hmm hmm
like everyone, it was kind of prepare for the worst and hope
Right.
for the best. We, at the outset of the pandemic, like a lot of healthcare organizations, we knew that there was going to be a tremendous influx and a strain put on uh, the, not only the facility itself to handle people coming into our EDs and our departments, but also on the clinical staff. So anything that we could do to reduce the stress of the frontline workers was something that was
hmm
also first and foremost.
hmm
We expected that we were going to need to be external to the building because that just seemed to be. I can't say that we were maybe leading the charge there. I don't know if it was more or
hmm
less just a generalization within the healthcare industry at large. But yes, you immediately saw in the news long and winding paths of cars that were snaking through parking lots and pulling up into
Yep.
tents. So our facilities and our security program were securing the areas. They were securing the tents. We were then securing exterior grade network equipment, external access points, and preparing for extending the network outside of the building,
Right.
and doing so in a safe manner for the people that were going to be working in there, but also just needing to kind of stay one step ahead about what we thought the needs were going to be. So we established the testing external to the facilities at a
hmm
couple of our locations, and we were doing that. And then it naturally progressed. Well, what's next? Because if you remember when we first, this is long before vaccine ever
Right.
entered the conversation. We were still just in the testing
hmm
phase, and that was the conversations then tended towards, well, what is next? What do we think
Right.
is going to be next? So we were acquiring some technology based on just conversations that we had of what we thought we were going to need to do, and that took into consideration: are we even going to outgrow the boundaries of the walls of our facilities? What if
mm
we need to
hmm
set something up in the middle of nowhere?
Right.
And for us, the middle of nowhere could be property that Mainline Health owned, had yet to
hmm
develop, but that we might need to, in some way, shape, or form, press into service.
Right.
And this obviously would be a location where we currently had no network connectivity.
Right. There's no infrastructure at
No
all, basically. Yeah.
infrastructure at all. And certainly the expectation of expediting an order through a carrier was,
Right.
it's like, the end of the
Yeah.
line is after that gentleman way back there, right, in terms of being able to expedite things. So, we got turned on to a technology that others were already using. And I had first seen probably in one of my early WAN summits. And that was just basically, if it wasn't satellite, it was now we were talking about LTE.
Like fixed wireless, basically.
Fixed wireless and or LTE cellular services to provide connectivity. And
okay, so some like, based on mobile handset kind of hotspot as well, like.
Correct. A little bit more somewhere beyond just your traditional consumer grade hotspot and a full-fledged network. So we had gotten involved with a company called Cradlepoint, and we decided that we were going to act quickly and acquire some of the technology based on just the conversations we had and the fact that it looked like it was going to fit the bill for what we needed to do. So we acquired some product lines that they were partnering on, which was called a mobile command center. Pelican case, kind of throw it in a trunk, be able to drive it somewhere and set up a network. And then we also acquired just some of the LTE wireless routers from the organization. We turned up some SIMs. We are a customer of both Verizon and AT&T. And on AT&T, you also have the FirstNet program. So we were able to get SIMs that were registered under FirstNet, which gives a little bit more preference to first responders.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that makes sense.
This is the first responder network. So give you a little bit elevated over the general consumer public.
Kind of like a elevated class of service, basically.
Correct.
Based on the,
correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, we brought that equipment in, we did some testing, and then it kind of it got put on the shelf because if you recall how this went, we then started to see some flattening of the curve. Finally, it wasn't 2 weeks, but as initially forecast, but we weren't quite sure that we were going to need it just yet. So we kind of fell back into what we were doing and just making sure that our frontline workers were being serviced. And then the vaccine came. So the next pivot was, all right, just like we tested these folks, we now have to vaccinate these folks.
Distribution.
So we're kind of back into the soup of how are we going to do this? And are we going to follow a similar model? And to start, we followed a very similar model to what we had done with testing. And that's how we proceeded with the initial vaccinations. But Mainline Health, being a very customer-oriented, customer-focused, patient-focused organization that we are, and with the somewhat varied adoption rates of vaccination, particularly by people of color and people that were in our underserved community, Mainline wanted to make sure that everything was being done in order to bring the vaccination to those areas. So we partnered
to remove any barriers to entry and make it as exactly. Yeah.
It was, it was basically, the commonality was, get the needle sticks in as many arms as we can. And what do we need to do that? So it presented the next set of challenges, which was, how do we get out into the community? So our administration and our leadership were very active with the local community. And it seemed that the way to reach the community, if it's not through their stomach, it's through their faith. So through faith-based organizations, we did outreach to the local faith leaders in the area. And we decided that what we were going to do is we were going to bring the vaccination to those locations.
Right.
And that we were going to then need to set up connectivity securely at these locations. So kind of enter back in that earlier testing that we had done the many months before. And we finally were able to then deploy that cellular LTE technology to create a secure VPN back to our data centers. We set up an access point as well at these locations to enhance the Wi-Fi connectivity in the area for our clinicians. And basically, our clinicians operated as if they were sitting in one of our buildings. They were able to securely multi-factor authenticate onto the network. They were able to access our electronic medical record, our EMR, which is Epic. And therefore, we were then able to track everything that was being done within these community-based vaccination centers. And we pretty much got into a cadence of setting up a location, doing a vaccination, and then moving on. And then after 3 to 4 weeks, we would then come back to that initial location because now it was time for the second dose.
Right.
So it was kind of that, wash, rinse, repeat as we went out into the community. We were kind of 1 week ahead of each thing. We were 1 week we were in a location in Aston. Another week we were in a location on the main line. Another week we were in a location somewhere in Southwest Philadelphia. And it was just this rolling, cascading thing of going there, setting up, breaking down, going to the next place, and then eventually coming back around and doing the same. And the technology really it treated us well. It was very easy to deploy. Once we had our configuration set, we were able to deploy it quickly. Our field services organization was able to get out there and kind of be first in at these locations.
Right.
And as you know from the networking side, right, the best praise that you can get is the sound of silence.
That's right. No complaints. Yeah.
When people are able to do their job, that is your silent applause for providing what they needed to do.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because while you were saying that, I was thinking like, oh, this is the case where everyone assumes the network can just be wherever they need it to be. But of course, in the background, that's an incredible challenge. And here's a case where, those of us interested in this, sort of area of the economy get to say, hey, we this facilitated something that was making a big public health difference. And you couldn't do this without network. You couldn't just go, put shots in arms without recording that and having the records all updated in real time and whatnot, right? So it's like being a part of kind of this global sort of effort. We sometimes lose sight of that, right, on the IT side of things,
Yeah, it was kind of that moment. If you've ever had the experience of trying to explain to family or friends, what is it that you do, right? I mean, I think we all default to that. Well, he's in IT. He does the IT. He does that computer stuff.
Right.
I was to the point of we were watching one of the news channels during one of the events, and the news coverage happened to be at one of the locations we had set up for, and for about 5 seconds within the piece, which was probably about a 2-minute piece, there was the wireless router.
There you go. Yeah.
That came in frame behind, only because there were two individuals. There was somebody registering, and behind the intake registrar was where we had set up the gear. So I was able to actually rewind and pause and
point it out.
Say, see that box? That's what I do, right?
Yeah,
so
there you go.
For all of the other glitz and glamour, it was just the box with the blinking lights.
I make sure all the lights are blinking the right color. That's
the right color.
That's right.
Yes, you'll notice There's a lot of greens and yellows, and but it was it was a very also a very humbling experience, because at the outset we didn't know. I mean, this was all kind of tested in a vacuum, tested in a lab, right? We set it up in one of our classrooms. We had people come in and try and beat it up and see how many people we could support on the technology and how it would work. But it really was a kind of push it down the runway and hope that it was going to get airborne. And then getting out of the community and talking to the folks where we were going to be coming into their facility and doing this. So just, number one, how grateful and how impactful it was for us to be coming to them. So you really were kind of extra motivated to want to succeed.
Right. Absolutely.
Because it really kind of brought it home that that we were making a difference. My team, as many I think engineering teams on the IT side, don't often really get to experience
Right.
the fruits of the labor. But
Hmm.
I was able to bring back that to my team directly, that this is what our work means
Right.
within the community to these people directly. And that's not something that we take lightly, and it's not something that comes along all that often.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, um, just to wrap that sort of section up, I'm curious, having rolled this out, established a relationship with Cradle Point and all that, is that something that you think you might now be able to kind of use and feed back to the hospital administrators that, hey, now we have these mobile capabilities, we can do new and creative things beyond the reacting to COVID?
Yeah. So with great success comes great responsibility.
That's
I mean,
right. Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
it was the poster child for, oh, we can do that.
Right. Right.
We certainly opened eyes, ears, and pocketbooks in terms of what it was that we were doing and why we were doing what we were doing. And just a shameless non plug that deploying this technology was not what I would consider to be burdensome from a cost perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
it took some work, but from a costing perspective, we weren't talking a large amount of outlay, which
Right.
certainly administration liked. So for anybody that's thinking about positioning this stuff, it is definitely worthwhile looking at it from that perspective. And without a doubt, the floodgates, they didn't immediately open, but they
Mm-hmm.
started to show where there were other opportunities for this technology. Uh,
Absolutely.
we we've had a couple of instances. We had a pipe burst at one of our facilities that happened to be over the data closet that was servicing the emergency
Of
department.
course, as they always
It
are, right?
always it always is.
Yeah.
Um, it took out two stacks, probably a total of 12 switches
Wow.
in the data closet
Hmm.
that impacted the ED area. We basically were able to stand up the Cradle Point device and mimic our network over
Hmm.
LTE and provide wireless connectivity so that the clinical staff could get what they call their WALs, or workstations on wheels. So
Hmm.
anyone in healthcare will recognize the term. And get those back online quickly so that the ED could return to some semblance
Right.
of normality in terms of servicing customers. We
Hmm.
also then we had a situation where we had a fire at one of our facilities, a small fire. Fires are never fun, no matter where they
Yeah.
happen to be,
Yeah.
um, particularly when they emanate from a patient room who was on oxygen, who decided that the cigarette was going to be
Oh,
more
Lord.
important
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
and that created a situation where once again we needed to supplement the network.
Hmm.
Um, we've also just had other opportunities within our organization where different parts of the organization wanted to host certain events
Ah.
that
Hmm.
were on campus but off net,
Right. Right. Right.
and we were
In the
able to
garden or
in
whatever.
the
Yeah.
garden, right?
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
one of them was an arbitorium that we have
Hmm.
at, like, kind of near one of our facilities, and they wanted to have a gathering there. So we were able to just continue to leverage this technology
Hmm.
in those instances, and once the word gets out that you can do it,
Right.
you're kind of called to perform those in those situations more frequently.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Which kind of cues me up for where I wanted to go next, which is the change in the way that knowledge workers around the world do their work now. Everyone is familiar with that change. It's not sort of ever returning. For some of us out there, even data intensive jobs like maybe a market analyst, it's not that big of a deal. I'm fine on my MacBook on my residential broadband connection. For really data intensive medical staff, I'm guessing that it was more complicated to get them home. Can you take us through that shift for
Sure.
physicians who have really data and bandwidth hungry kind of workstations in the facilities? How did you get them to be working remotely?
Yeah. So the last time we spoke, I was mentioning that the first the need that came to us was from our radiology group. So
Exactly. Yeah.
we partner with radiologists, a radiology group, and two things. One thing was this is something that the radiologist group had been asking for pre-pandemic, was kind of the ability to work anywhere, meaning working remotely.
Right.
And what that meant was, extremely expensive gear in terms of the workstation and the monitor. The monitors themselves are, I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars for medical grade monitors in order to read diagnostic imaging at that
Right. They're
level.
looking for
This
a little
isn't
speck on someone's lungs or
right.
whatever.
This
Yeah. Yeah.
isn't
Yeah.
this isn't pulling out
hmm
your iPhone and making a movie as we all see on the commercials today, and a little bit more on the line. Um, this got expedited because what happened during the pandemic, and this is just one of those things again, right? Just because you're in a hospital environment didn't bring you, it brought you closer to the virus, right?
Right.
If anything, right? And the radiologist group in the hospital is in an area that those individuals are working together closely a lot.
hmm
What happened was the virus basically almost crippled one of our radiology reading groups because someone tested positive,
hmm
which immediately then meant that anyone that was in that area or came
It's
in contact with
quarantined.
that individual had to be quarantined.
Right.
And we immediately had an issue with who's going to read these films. So it
Right.
kind of pressed the issue of we need to get this going. And the problem
hmm
for so long is that, as you mentioned, the initial thing of just sending a radiologist home with a laptop,
Right.
and connecting up as our typical end user, using a VPN client, just wasn't going to cut it.
Right.
So we had begun playing around with a SD-WAN service offering from Comcast, because we already
hmm
had services with Comcast being a regional provider in the area of their ENS or Ethernet network services.
Right.
So they had partnered with Versa in terms of delivering SD-WAN technology, and we had begun to play around with it. So we said, okay, no time like the present. So
hmm
we tested the scenario out. It worked very well with our test group. And we then decided that we were going to roll this out to the radiologists. So we were going to deliver SD-WAN technology directly to the radiologist's home, along with a workstation and a setup to allow them to basically be able to perform their duties at home.
Now, is this
And
a
then
physical SD-WAN device? Is it software? Is it?
it's so a combination of both. There is
hmm
what Comcast deems a UCPE,
hmm
and just an end user
Right.
CPE, and white labeled uh, as Comcast from Versa on the underlay.
Right.
But the thing that was very appealing about this technology, as well as with many of the offerings in the space, is that it was an overlay, meaning
Right.
there was no requirement that the individual had Comcast as their
hmm
ISP,
hmm
and that there's also we've run this with bandwidths as low as 100 down, 25 up.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
So it takes all of the acceleration and that type of data intensive work. It takes it off of the end workstation, which would
hmm
typically be your laptop, right? Like right
Right.
now, my laptop's working overtime, right?
hmm
Running everything that it needs to run in the background in order to provide the connection. But you and I are just having a conversation, so it works. But at that level, it takes all of that processing off of the workstation, does it at the CPE level,
hmm
and once again, we're creating secure connections for these individuals back to our data centers for them to access what they need to access.
Right.
And it was another big win because it was something that they had asked for a while. It was just never got prioritized.
Right.
Never waste a good pandemic
That's
in
right.
order to
Yeah.
motivate you to do something. And so far we went from that initial 3 or 4 docs that did our POC for us. I think today we turned up probably somewhere in the neighborhood of our 51st
Wow.
doc.
So it's
On
pretty
the
standard within the organization now to have
it,
this set
it
up for those who
it
kind of.
it has become that, and I'm just waiting for the next email for the next challenge uh,
Right. Yeah.
as to what that's going to be as well.
What one quick follow up on that? We're dealing with residential broadband connection, like you said. It doesn't have to be Comcast Xfinity. It could be they might have FiOS or whatever.
Yeah,
Do they need 2 lines though? Are you connecting like an LTE to that, or is this not?
we yeah. I mean, a good question. To date, no. We
Mhm.
started out under the premise that if we were going to require the docs to bring in a second ISP service specifically for this, we
Mhm.
kind of held that card out there, but we weren't playing it yet.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we said, let's see how this works. So we did the sampling, and we had some of the docs, particularly those with family members that were working from home, kids that were on Xbox.
I was
People that were
I
streaming.
upgraded my FiOS, triple in downstream speed at least
Right.
when this all hit. As many people did. So yeah.
And we found a couple of things. Uh, just to draw a quick parallel, early days of the early days of cell phones and that technology. When you had the devices that used to carry and everything else in terms of what their compute power and
Hmm.
everything else was. There was you needed a lot more on the back end to support some of that stuff. With the improvements in technology, what we found was, like most people, people that had cell phones back in the day will say, right, that those were the high and mighty, right? You
Right.
had a
Yeah.
data plan and you had a voice plan. Let's face it, nowadays most of these docs, they had gigabit. They were signed up for the preeminent internet plan at their
Right,
homes.
right. Because
Period.
we're lucky here because everyone already had Netflix and HBO Max or whatever, and so the low, you had an impetus to have that kind of connection in the first place, and two, the ISPs had built out residential networks that could accommodate this kind of traffic. So yeah.
Yeah, so we kind of really leveraged that. Like we
Hmm.
weren't running into somebody that was running. We we didn't run into the AOL dial-up scenario
Right,
in terms of
right.
somebody saying that this is what I have. Most people out of the gate were coming to us
Yeah.
with high-speed
Hmm.
internet connectivity.
And just to be frank about it, right, you're dealing with upper income, upper middle class kind of people who have this resource readily available already, right? So
Yeah,
it's
tend to live in residential areas that are
mhm.
first up in terms of carriers building
Yeah.
out their networks in those areas. So, be that as it may, we did leverage that. So we have yet to encounter someone who felt that they needed to
Hmm.
install a secondary service just for this.
Right.
Um, can't say that it won't happen, but
Sure.
as of
Yeah.
now, everyone is kind of just commingling
Hmm. Hmm.
with their environment.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, to wrap things up, I wanted to hit one more thing that we've discussed in the past, and it's a topic that actually ends up coming up on the show a lot because it's an incredible pain point for a lot of IT infrastructure, WAN manager types, and that's M&A activity. So you had brought up to me when we talked last about this company Tower Health that was kind of failing, and Mainline Health came along, I think, and bought Tower Health up, and you had to pull those sites in. Can you take us a little bit through that story, or if I got the details a little wrong, fix them?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
I will.
yeah, yeah,
Let me make a
yeah,
proviso statement
yeah.
before administration has a
Well, we
coronary.
can always cut me saying that anyway. But so,
Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mainline did not acquire Tower Health. What it was is that
Gotcha.
Tower Health was a regional healthcare competitor in the
Hmm.
healthcare market who fell on hard times, had been on hard times for a number of
Gotcha.
years, and eventually just couldn't find any suitors for the business,
Hmm.
which left them
Hmm.
no alternative other than to shutter their doors at certain facilities, and many times on short notice. And when I
Hmm.
talk short notice, I'm talking about 24 to 48 hours
Oh,
of
wow.
the ED will be closed as of
Right.
this coming Friday, kind of.
Which can be disruptive for the community, right?
which
So, yeah.
which that was the concern, right?
Hmm.
So what we were preparing for was when we heard that news, we looked at where Tower Health was, where are these facilities relative to mainline health facilities, and we could almost expect that this was going to have an impact on the influx of patients that were now going to be coming to our EDs, to our
Ah, I
offices.
see. Hmm.
And that's what we needed to make the accommodation for, was
I
how are
see.
we
I
going
see.
to handle the additional foot traffic? How are we
Hmm.
going to staff up? Staffing is just, there's all of the non-technical things that go into what the company needed to do during the pandemic, right? Just
Hmm.
getting people, retaining people. You saw the stories on the news of healthcare employees being burned out
Right.
because it was just day in, day out, day
Yeah.
after day, year after year, as it turns out. So we just needed to make sure that we were in a position to handle the expansion and growth. We were
Hmm.
we were turning non-clinical areas within the hospital into clinical areas.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
were running tabletop what if exercises. What if we need to turn half of the cafeteria into triage beds?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
What does that look like? So
Hmm.
once again, we were then looking at expanding our network presence just even within our own building, but to parts of the building that were never really originally intended
Right.
to house
Right.
those services.
Which I should say probably is not an experience foreign to any healthcare provider in the last 2 years, even leaving aside their next door neighbors shutting down or whatever, right? So it's like,
Hmm.
capacity was already in short supply to begin with. So, yeah.
Yeah, working with some, we had also were talking with our peers within the industry. I know that Virtua, at the outset of the pandemic, Virtua had opened up like kind of a mass vaccination center
Hmm.
over in the South Jersey area. But one advantage, if you want to call it that they had was is that they had a vacant location that was going to be turned into a long term site
Hmm.
for testing and vaccination. So what they had on their side was they could then look to deliver services to that building that had some more permanency. They weren't
Right.
going to just be there for a couple of days and then be out of there. But for us, it was, when we were doing the sites that we were doing, that was the thing. We were not looking at a lot of permanency for stuff that was happening
Hmm.
outside of our four walls, but we still had to deal with what was going on at our facilities. And that might mean relocating an administrative team to another part of the hospital because they happen to be one floor above or one floor below a clinical area that we need
Hmm.
to convert to COVID beds,
Right. Right.
that we need to convert to triage beds, that we need to convert to additional ICU beds. So we had even entertained, dropping a fully outfitted trailer at one of our locations that had
Hmm.
everything that you needed to hook up, except you needed to extend all of your hookups to it. We didn't get to that point, but we
Hmm.
were. It was on the table for
Right.
consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And sort of to your point of picking up these additional things, you already had this Cradle Point service and the Comcast Versa kind of service set up that would accommodate making these changes much more rapidly, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we could. Yeah. That was our going to be our go to, and will
Hmm.
continue to be our go to
Hmm.
until the next greatest thing comes
Yeah.
along, I guess.
Yeah, excellent. Well, on that note, this has been a really interesting case study, especially given the times and again the changes in technology really kind of fortuitously happened, just in time for it to be applied to these new situations. What do you see as your next challenge, or what's your next big project that's coming up here?
Well, I think like many folks, I think uh, everyone is shying away from calling it the new normal, as we are as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We have our what we're calling not our return to work, because even the marketing that went into that, the team saying I don't think you want to call it return to work because everyone's been working really
They've been
hard.
working. Yeah, exactly.
Nobody's
Yeah.
not been not working.
Yeah.
So we call it return to office. But
Hmm.
whatever you want to paint it to be, I think the ongoing challenge will now be the fact that people have become accustomed to, and organizations have now gotten a dose of,
Hmm.
the fact that their business can operate normally and at times outperform what they were previously doing
Yeah.
with a very diverse, dispersed workforce.
Yeah. You're never putting that genie back in the bottle. It's impossible at this point. Yeah.
And I think that becomes the next challenge.
Hmm.
And also just having to keep in mind that let's not lose the lessons learned during this pandemic. Knowing that we don't know what the future in that area is going to hold for healthcare
Certainly.
organizations. And
Hmm.
I think that we have now learned how to be more agile in terms of delivering services. And that might be the new norm. I mean, certainly
Hmm.
we had what I would call moderate adoption of our telehealth services.
Hmm.
As you
Hmm.
can imagine, during the pandemic, that just went through the roof.
Right. Right.
And so things like MyChart, which is our patient looking ability for a patient at one of our facilities through our Epic backend EMR to have visibility into their records. People now
Hmm.
have that. They have easy access to their medical record. They have easy access to telehealth services. They can go to those telehealth services
Hmm.
wherever they want. They can be on
Right.
the West Coast, East Coast, anywhere. If we're going to keep pace within the industry, we have to keep coming up with ways as to why are we a provider of choice? Why are we
Hmm.
recommended
Hmm.
by friends and family? And, outside of the box services and staying ahead of things of this nature are one way to keep that edge.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That so much of this isn't just about reacting to exigencies or whatever, but it's about facilitating new ways of doing business. The digital transformation as a healthcare consumer, right, has been great. Like don't need to file through my filing cabinet and find what my cholesterol was 10 years ago, right? I have a portal. And so, just those kinds of things being facilitated by the IT infrastructure team, I think, and filtering up to decisions at management is a really interesting place for the network,
It is, yeah. I mean, so emerging technologies, and I just think the ubiquity of the wireless network becoming
Hmm.
the wireless network is quickly becoming what the wired network is and has been.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
have to deliver. We're being asked in many instances to look at our Wi-Fi infrastructure and deliver wired grade quality, if
Right.
you will,
Right.
to those types of services. We have a lot of mobile services that people are looking to do at the hospital.
Hmm.
One of the things that I noticed, we all pitched in across the organization. I had the opportunity early on. We were all asked to help out with doing screening. What screening meant is that at the onset of the pandemic, if you had to take a nurse to stand at the front of the hospital in order to read a thermal thermometer that was taking people's temperatures as they came into the hospital
Hmm.
and ask them the 10 questions that we were asking at the
Right.
time, you're taking somebody who's trained to treat patients off of a floor. So we were asked
Right.
as part of the organization to pitch in. So
Hmm.
as a screener, that's what I had the opportunity to get out in the field at our facilities. I was either greeting people at the door, taking their temperature, or I was one of the people that they was passed along to. So when you came in, Greg, how you doing? Why are you here today? How
Right.
are you feeling? Have you had any of these symptoms?
Yeah.
And then the last thing was, where do you need to go? And you might
Mm-hmm.
say, well, I'm seeing Dr. So-and-so in suite 354.
Right.
Well, I don't know all of our facilities inside and out. So
Right.
I was also heavily relying on someone who worked at the hospital who might be paired with me,
Hmm.
or the ladies at the front desk that were used to people coming in needing to be directed.
Right.
Rounding this out, what I'm saying is that wayfinding is one of the things that we've been discussing. Is, wouldn't it have been great for people to be able to come into our hospital and basically just hit the link
Log
and
in.
say,
Yeah.
here you are,
Right.
and here's where you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
And basically through wayfinding technology, be able to
Yeah.
just have that person follow their device,
Mm-hmm.
and you will get to where you need to be. So
yeah, I love hearing about that, because you from the abstract kind of market analyst seat, you're hearing, oh, okay, we're going to facilitate digital transformation. Well, it's much more interesting, I think, to hear what does digital transformation mean for me as a consumer, right? And how is that going to change over the next few years? And every time I hear things like that, it's actually it's pretty amazing. It's more than you think, even, right?
yeah,
Especially some of these, kind of consumer tools become, made into business grade tools in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. That becomes, oh, okay, the world's going to work more the way that I thought that it could, but it's just, companies have to take some time sometimes to get the infrastructure ready to do those really cool things that we might sort of take for granted on our smartphones in other contexts, right? So
right.
yeah,
So that's
excellent.
what's next.
Yeah, that sounds really fun. Oh, we should catch up about that sometime. So
Absolutely.
yeah, excellent. Well, yeah, Carl, this has been great. Thanks so much for doing this. And if folks listening, sort of wanted to reach out and ask you any questions, is there some way they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. You can certainly reach me via my LinkedIn profile is one way to
Perfect.
do so.
Yeah.
You can hit me there. That would probably be the best and
Yeah.
most common for most folks.
Yeah, I talk about this with our marketing manager all the time. And I'm not on Twitter, and I'm going to try to avoid being on Twitter. So I'm like, I'm on LinkedIn. Find me there. It's good enough, So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I hear you.
excellent. All right. Well, thanks so much. Have a good one.
All right, thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. Had a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening. The WAN Manager podcast comes from the team at TeleGeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. I also wrote the theme song that you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com. Or if you want to get right into more WAN content like you hear on the show, you can visit TeleGeography's WAN forum at wanforum.com. We've got all of our podcast episodes over there, WAN Manager survey data, and extra analysis pieces. That's all for now. So until next time, WAN enthusiasts,